Let's go to our panelists. So Adriana, if you want to welcome and if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure, thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me here today. I am currently at DHS. I do a lot of cyber risk and vulnerability management there for critical infrastructure. And then on the side, I do a lot of cyber consulting for some private companies. And I'm excited to be here and talk to you guys today.
Thank you so much for taking the time out. Terry, welcome. And if you'd introduce yourself.
Hi, Brian. Thanks for having me on as well. I do consulting work as principal consultant and vCISO with SideChannel, helping different folks understand and build out their security programs. I'm excited to be here to talk about some just basic stuff that helps out.
Excellent. And yeah, like I said, I'm the managing partner and founder for SideChannel, so I was able to ask Terry to join us. He's one of our CISOs. Our model obviously is we hire former enterprise CISOs and provide consulting with them through to our clients who are traditionally mid-market companies and startups. So, our focus is central around startups, mid-market companies, implementing a security program, actually doing a lot with the foundational aspects that we've been discussing on this entire webinar series. That'll be the end of what you hear from me about SideChannel. I do want to again thank Gabby for putting this together. Him and Wizer and their training platform and content, I think is a great fit for the mid-market. That's why we're talking about this topic, is because both of our firms, want to focus on helping out smaller businesses. I think it's important. So let's get into it. Today's discussion is around detection. So if anybody does follow me online, I am a NIST CSF fanboy. Recently wrote a book on the NIST cybersecurity framework. And you look at the CSF and you look at other frameworks, but looking at CSF, you've got identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. So obviously working left of boom, you are in the identify and protect space, right? Trying to keep bad things from happening. But then once something happens, how do you quickly detect it and use that detection to inform your response and your recovery capabilities? So, in the kind of the look at mid-market, small businesses, foundational aspects, right? That's what we're here. We're not trying to solve Walmart's detection capabilities, right? That's not who's in the audience. Unless you are Adam Eli left Walmart. He's at Fidelity now. But if anybody is at Walmart, drop a question in here and ask us how we can maybe help you. Although I think it'd be the other way around. I like people, process, technology, right? So, dealer's choice. What should we start with first, as far as like when we're thinking about detection? Terry, what are your thoughts? Where do you start when you start thinking about detection for a company to implement?
So for me, it's kind of the pure basics, right? The place that you're most likely to get attacked is your people and on your desktop. So there is training, there's focus on people understanding the threat coming at them through email and other places. And then there's something on the desktop. It's got to be more than AV. It's EDR. Maybe you don't need the best in the business, but you need something there that's going to catch those early bits. So that's where I kind of start with from a detection perspective.
So you're focusing people-centric. What are people touching? What are people using? The people themselves, right? And then how can you detect what's going to happen to them? Okay, I like that. Adriana, what are your thoughts? Where do you like to start when you start thinking about detection as a foundational aspect to implement? Think greenfield company, greenfield organization, magic, king for a day, queen for a day. How are you starting on detection with them?
So I would probably agree with Terry on, focusing on people, but I would also want to take a look at the type of data that the company has, right? So what are the areas that are likely to be dealing with the biggest threats? So that's going to be financial data, that's going to be personally identifying data, so things like that. So I'd really want to take a look at, how those are protected and then how to detect any anomalies that, we're seeing in that type of data. So that's where I would probably also start.
Excellent. Can you hear me? My machine is freaking out again.
We can hear you.
I heard everything you said, but okay, great. So looking at kind of data centric. Okay, great. So what obviously if you're trying to protect something, you need to then detect if something goes wrong with your ability to protect. So we're focusing on people, we're focusing on data. So again, just kind of like identify, protect, detect, and then we're getting to respond and recover, right? So that's the kind of timeline, if you will, for where things are going on. So I like this. So people, data types, obviously you've identified what your people are, hopefully you've identified what your data is, hopefully. I say that because not a lot of people do, and you can't protect what you don't know exists. So if you haven't done an asset inventory, type of inventory, you're not gonna be able to put a protection in place, let alone probably be able to detect when those things go wrong. So let's go to, I'm just gonna half give up on GoToMeetings controls. I'm not gonna be able to see all of you guys, unfortunately. And I'm just, it's like the worst day for tech failures. All right, we're just gonna do it like this. How do you, right? I guess let's go back to Terry. So if you're focusing on people and you're gonna focus on these things, what are you looking at from, let's start email, right? Or just like what the people are doing first. How are you detecting that for them? Like, is it as simple as, just working with HR, knowing who your people are, figuring out, are you profiling? Are you doing it at like the desktop level and just saying, okay, everybody's kind of the same and what's implemented on their systems, I just have to detect against? Because you can do insider threat detection, you could do external threat detection, you're gonna kind of treat them a little differently. Like how are you, going into and actually looking at that detection function for your example around people?
So I like to have solutions that are looking at URLs and attachments that are coming in and monitoring those, right? So most of the products on the market today do URL rewrites, things like that, so that you
Right.
can track what people click on. And if it makes it through your solution, but then is convicted later, you've got a record of who clicked on it, so you understand what's going on there. URL filtering on the desktop, same thing, blocking the known bad, keeping track of things that are later convicted and help you come back and understand what's happening. So it's a bit of administrative controls and trying to teach people how to recognize these things, but then from a technical controls perspective, it's understanding what people have clicked on, what they've downloaded, things like that. So a little bit of both.
Got it. Okay. Adriana, back to you. So if you're looking at data, right? So Terry's focusing on the people. And by the way, my view is, both of these should be done, right? Like one's not more important than the other. If we're going to focus on data, again, like how are you able to take, all right, you've hopefully done the inventory, you're doing some protections around the data, but then what exactly are you doing within this detection space on data types or just data as a whole? Like, what are you really looking for?
Right, so it's going to be a lot of monitoring, right? So monitoring the access management, who's trying to gain access to that data, who has access to that data. And then I think on the other end of it, or what is any anomalies that data is being used for? Is it pulled? Is it being extracted? Is really understanding how the data is typically used, but then being able to identify anomalies in that and in the usage of that data and who's accessing it. So that would be kind of one of the top ways I'd be looking or trying to detect if something just isn't right there.
So let's think of ourselves in a small business, mid-sized business company, right? Like what do we, based on limited resources, let's take a shelfware example, right? Maybe we already use Office 365, maybe we have some basic capabilities in place, but we don't really have a lot. We don't have we have a limited budget. We want to make the right investment, right? We want to make and put the limited dollars that we have to best use. We do want to address security, right? So we're at least over that hump, right? We're over the, I'm not going to spend any money on security. It's like, well, then why are you watching this webinar? We at least want to spend some money to address the risk, right? We're going to resource it appropriately. Adriana, like, what's something people can leave this webinar and go, you know what? All right, I can try that. That's going to be a low-cost solution for me. I can start doing that and see how it pans out. And if it works, great. If I feel like I want to invest more later, I can. But what's something people are going to maybe just start with?
So, from a very low cost perspective, I think, Terry, you had mentioned this earlier, is training and awareness. I think it really starts there. If we go back to the people example of detection and, how people are, dealing with email, opening links, things like that, I think that's a really kind of low cost way to start, and having a very robust kind of, I wouldn't say necessarily a program, you're a small business, but a robust way of making sure that people are aware. And then on the other end of that is putting some investment into creating policies and procedures. Again, it's not something that's going to be heavily costly. It's going to take some time, but if people understand the threats of cyber, but then also are able to be guided in the correct way to handle data and to handle interactions online. I think that would be a really good start to mitigating potential risk.
Okay, I like that. Terry, what are your thoughts? Like, where are you going to start with a limited budget or no budget? What's maybe kind of a day one type of a investment of either time or maybe some small resources and technology to address some of these areas?
So there's some things that you can do that are relatively inexpensive in terms of canary tokens. You can create administrative users in your Active Directory that have no time during the day which they can actually be used. You don't want them to be disabled because that's easy to find. And then you can monitor for any use of accounts like that. So we know that one of the things that adversaries do when they get in, start looking around for administrative accounts, trying to understand that. So if you can put some, honeypots tokens in there, either, from a file system perspective, from an administrative account perspective, low dollar items, easy to do, low false positive rates.
Yeah, I've actually, so one of the things that I've done previously is you have the ability within like a Windows shop to do this quite easily. And what you can do is through file services, actually establish notifications based on access. And if you create, say, a fake, create like, a fake, what was it, Okta, they popped those guys and apparently they found like an Excel spreadsheet that said like LastPass, credentials, like all in like one Excel spreadsheet, right? Take something like that. Think about something like that. Create, an HR looking type of Excel spreadsheet or an access database, something that looks similar to what you have. And everybody knows why we call them canaries, right? It's pulling from the canary in the coal mine concept. But what you can do is like create that fake file, like what you're saying, Terry. You can do this in Windows very easily. You can do it in Linux as well. And then anytime, and then set the permissions on those files, and then create notifications using file services off of that file to notify you. Now, obviously, no one should be touching that file, like even legitimate internal people. And like you don't tell people this, but like create those files, do that. Same thing with admins, like in accounts. You have the ability within, like you said, within Active Directory and others to create accounts that if an account is used, like you said, during certain times, right, and it should never be used, notify the administrator. So now at least, is it going to tell you, is it going to like really give you like, oh, it's this person doing that and give you the full story? No, but it's going to start giving you the beginnings of what you're going to have to do around detection. So I always like shelfware. I always like maximizing what you already have in your environment and what you've already purchased before you go off and buy something else. So yeah, if you have this ability to do this within Windows, has some innate built-in, I always get that word wrong, abilities to do some type of canary action, do that on files and do that on an account. So that's always fun. When you get high speed, that's when you can start like dropping in like fake VMs with like full-on vulnerable systems, and when people start pinging that, you're like, oh wait, hold on, right? Especially if it's internally accessible only. I don't think that's day one type of activity. This is more your day one stuff. All right, so we're now trying to figure out, okay, we've got people, we've got data. We're starting to think about maybe how to address these. What about what about folks who are like, you know what, I don't really have any kind of on-prem environments. I don't have Windows. I don't have anything. A lot of companies now are SaaS and cloud only usage. What are some thoughts around those spaces? Can you apply these same concepts to a startup that has it's 100% AWS and uses SaaS, no on-prem whatsoever? What are your thoughts around that? Let's either one. We'll go to Adriana or
okay.
Terry. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Terry.
So a lot of the same principles apply, right? So you can still create administrative accounts that you never expect any use for and monitor. You can create canary files that you put in OneDrive or in AWS or S3 buckets. There are a number of open source products out there that allow you to kind of create these things that phone home whenever they're open. They're pretty easy to do. So I think that the same things work there in a lot of ways.
Adriana, do you have any thoughts on kind of that shift to a cloud or SaaS only type of company?
No, I agree with Terry, I think, but again, kind of going back to, all right, well, we get these alerts, right? Well, how do we handle it? Who's looking at it? Who's monitoring it? How do we, once we get that alert, what do we do from there? So that's also something that I think a lot of people need to think about. So it's not just that, okay, we got an alert, great, but what happens then? And how do we use that information to really identify what's actually going on?
We had a great question. I can't tell from who because my screen kind of stats, I think is the name, the asker, person asking the question, but what software do you like for data discovery and inventorying? Anybody have any preferences? Specifically data, I guess not like just regular asset inventorying, but any data discovery. I mean, I've seen like Varonis, I've seen Lapide. I think those are really the only two. I've used Windows file systems from way back when I was an enterprise architect and SANS admin in my early days, using those to like do some data discovery and inventorying on systems I had, but haven't really touched that realm since. I don't know if either of you have any favorites or insights into software for data discovery and inventory.
No, those are the ones that I've used, but those have all been at bigger organizations, which tends to be the challenge with those tools. They're pretty expensive. I've done some stuff with open source tools in the past, and the problem that you have is, if you're looking certainly from a DLP perspective, you get a lot of false positives. And what you want to focus on in the mid-market here is we want detections that don't have a lot of noise, right? We want to focus on things that, hey, when they fire, there's a higher likelihood that there's something that we're after here.
Right. Very true. Yeah, with limited resources, you don't have a lot of time to get into like a detection cycle and spin wheels on things that you need to kind of work on things with high fidelity. Exactly. Adriana, any ideas on or preferences on tech that's out there?
No, I have to agree with Terry on that. But yeah, no, not entirely. That's kind of.
No worries. Great question. Yeah, it's a tough one for the mid market. I don't think we've really seen any real leaders that are kind of geared towards the smaller size businesses, and usually what comes with that is something that's financially feasible. So that's probably the biggest obstacle for these organizations to be able to make their products available and then actually being used in that space. So go ahead, Terry. Yeah.
No, and I was just going to say, in that space, the biggest thing that we can do is spend that time to understand where the key data is, right? We don't need to necessarily protect everything all at once, but if we've got specific data that we know is going to cause us a problem, either from a regulatory perspective, an embarrassment perspective, focus on protecting those things as opposed to a more generic across the board look at stuff.
Right. So we talked about kind of some areas to kind of pinpoint on. I will say, like from a detection standpoint, if no one's doing this, what I like to detect on I just kind of want to elaborate on both of your points. We've talked about data. We've talked about I'll say identity. Okay, people doing something, and I want to come off of that in a second. You've also got the endpoint, right? You've got your applications. That could be your SaaS environments. You've got your infrastructure, okay? One of the things that I find interesting is everyone looks at this when they're thinking about detection, especially if you're a CISO, maybe a larger enterprise or a smaller enterprise, or CIO director of IT level, and you're doing detection, you're focusing very on cyber, right? One thing, especially around ID, is you need to marry in the physical security components where that's possible, because, and this is the example I've always used is like the Superman, issue, right? Like, you badged into the building back when we used to go into buildings, but like that will eventually come back to, there will be a point where this will still be relevant, and still is relevant at some places. But you badged into the building at 9 a.m. and then you also VPN'd into your into the network at 9 a.m. from France. It's like, you can't do that. Like, that's a problem. One of those two things is compromised. Either your physical security card and your badge access, or your VPN is compromised. Now, I am a betting man. I'm going to put my dollars on that it's your credentials. So when you think about what's going on, you have to kind of figure out what's the most likely. Chances are it was probably your credentials. But I had the opportunity when I was a CISO, obviously at a larger organization, and then again at DoD, but like to oversee and integrate physical security into cyber. And I think this is an area that's lost on and overlooked, and they're kind of siloed. So if you are a large enough organization, or you are using any type of key card access or anything else around that, where you have a physical component to be able to get into buildings or rooms or whatever, don't overlook this data to tie into your detection capabilities. Marry that in with your cyber team. Get to know your physical security teams. Like, this is an important area. This is a big miss, I feel like organizations who actually have this data, they're not really using it as much as they could be. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're kind of going through the detection cycle and you're looking for data points to start integrating. All right, so I just wanted to kind of elaborate on that, because that's always a fun one that people. So I had the opportunity to teach the master's course for incident response at Boston College the last couple of years, and like these are some of the things that we go over. Is like, well, what kind of data are we pulling in? Like, we could sit here and build a whole open source framework using Security Onion, Zeek, what used to be called Bro, and all these other fun stuff to like pull in a full detection. Maybe we do that on another time. I don't know. That's some whiteboard fun. But anyway, so detection happens, right? It's informed by data. Let's think about, like, maybe we're getting into some of the response activities, but like, what do you do with it, right? And I think there's 2 points I want us to like kind of like hone in on. So detection can obviously inform response and what to go do. Okay, that one's pretty easy, right? But it should also, and this is I think where people also miss, it should also take a look at and inform what we're supposed to do better around the protections. Because obviously a protection failed, and now we're detecting something. So let's go to the first one. Let's go to response. We're detecting, mid-market company. We've got some detections in place. Maybe we have a small SIM. Maybe we have an outsized MSSP. What should we be thinking about internally as far as response to detected events? What are some kind of like ground rules that we're just constantly reinforcing with small businesses? Terry, what are your thoughts around that response aspect?
So for me, one of the big things is thinking through what are the likely scenarios that would happen, and then kind of playing with those and understand what are the things that you need to look at. So simple things like, hey, you've had a credential stuffing attack against you. Do you know what your communications is going to look like? So things you don't have to spend a long period of time arguing over how some of the responses are in these areas, where you can kind of think about it ahead of time and understand. So anything that you can do to kind of play through what your risks are, how those are likely to happen, and really just think about it ahead of time, just really puts you ahead of the game in the event that it does happen.
So we're looking at most likely scenarios. For a guy who writes on the board a lot, you'd think I could spell better. So we're looking for likely scenarios, use cases, things that, I don't know, most likely to happen to me in my business. We don't have to think about every scenario. We just have to think about most likely ones.
Yeah, we're not trying to find the black swans. We're just trying to find.
Right. We're just trying to find the ones that could most be impactful. I got a question in here. I'm going to come back to that while Adriana's giving us. What are your thoughts here, Adriana? Like, how am I going to run with a detection as a response activity?
Yeah, so I think Terry's is kind of that first step, right? So what are all the different scenarios, and then how to react to that, and having some sort of plan. And I kind of always go back to policy and procedures, and really having something laid out, at least as a guideline. Not every scenario is going to be the same. There's going to be caveats to everything, but really having some sort of solid plan in place and understanding who is the team that's going to be that group that reacts to it, right? Because you don't want everyone kind of joining or a fire happening and everyone's running around and kind of figuring that out, but really who's that response team, and identifying them beforehand and really making sure that you have a team in place that touches every aspect of your business, right? So that might be the financial, that might be the marketing, communications, CEO, someone, so really having that built out prior to that will decrease the time to mitigate and hopefully decrease any losses.
So I'm putting up here IR planning because that's what I heard you say, right? And one thing I've always told people, and you're spot on, right? Is people get into and seem to kind of get really into IR when detection happens and response, but I've seen organizations of people open up their IR plan for the first time they need it. And what you're saying is like, yes, you need all this, but we should be building that over here to the left, right? Not during the fire.
Yep, absolutely. And not only do you build it, but you should practice it. You should make sure it works. And there's always, issue happens, detection happens. What's after action? What can we do better? And how do we continually improve that plan? And, something I also think about is having a business continuity plan as well. In case something is detected and you have to shut down a system, or, and that's the best way to remediate it. How do we continue the business as is? Without incurring more losses for having to shut it down, or change things in order to mitigate whatever you've detected or issue has come along.
Right. So we're going beyond response into recovery, having a BC and DR plan, obviously having that tied back. You're going to find a lot of things that are going to be tied between your IR plan and your BC and your DR plan,
yes.
But obviously doing that as far left as possible, building your IR plan way over here, right? This is where we're building the plan. If you're on a timeline, right? Building the plan, testing the plan, constantly testing the plan. That's always useful. Can't go wrong with testing, right?
No.
So, and test, and test, and test, and test, and test until you actually need it. So it's funny, you get into the kind of the point I was trying to make here, which was when detections fail, we need to, protect. So what are you seeing, like, kind of in groups, those aha moments where they're going, wow, we detected that. This is the third time we've had this incident. We've had to detect and respond to this thing. Maybe we don't want to keep doing this, right? What are we doing? Like, what are those aha moments, and how are you seeing groups be really effective in saying, you know what, we need to make a change somewhere over here so we stop repeating this detection and response cycle on the same issue? If Terry or Adriana want to take it.
So something that I see a lot is companies are identifying that they aren't patching vulnerabilities within, a significant, they're taking too long to patch them, right? And so they kind of see it over and over and over and over again, and they're detecting these vulnerabilities, and sometimes incidents are happening and they have to use that incident response plan. And so one of the solutions that they might do is investing in being able to patch those vulnerabilities quicker. And so that takes not only some resource investment, but it's also going to take some policy procedure changes as well. So that's the, kind of going back after action again of that incident response, seeing what happened, and then saying, okay, well, then how can we prevent having to do this incident response again? What are the issues and why did this happen?
So key, right? You don't want to keep living in this cycle here, right? If you see something and you're doing something about it and continually find yourself in that same result, having to detect and resolve that same issue, you should be informing your protections. You should be informing your identification, procedures if you're following this. And hopefully now you're no longer doing it. So if it's vulnerabilities, enough of these types of incidents should inform your team, hey, we're not patching fast enough. That's a great example, right? Yeah. Or we're not patching certain things fast enough.
Right. And it's not just the case of, okay, I identified that this, we've detected that this vulnerability is open and needs to be patched, and I fixed it and it's great, we can move on. It's the process behind patching and identifying, detecting it, and then, closing those critical high vulnerability gaps a lot sooner.
Right. I warned that this would happen, but we got some great questions that come up. Somebody did ask, should we focus on what's top of mind for leadership, i.e. ransomware? Kind of, Terry, back to your use cases, right? Yes, but don't just respond to the news, right? Like you should really kind of look at, key examples. Terry, your example, I didn't write it down, but like likely scenarios, right? I can't see the name here, but someone brought up, ransomware as a likely scenario that you're probably going to have to detect and respond to. What are some other ones, just so folks can kind of start putting together playbooks?
I think it depends on what your business is, but certainly fake websites, copies of your sites if you're in the e-commerce space.
Yep. Stolen credentials. You said credential stuffing. That was the one you said earlier.
Credential stuffing.
So I think Terry brings up a good point with it depends on what industry you're in, right? So if you're in the healthcare industry, the type of attacks that you're going to be dealing with might be different than if you're in the energy industry or chemical manufacturing. They're all different threats that we're dealing with. So I think kind of going by industry and really focusing on what you're seeing within that sector specifically is a great way to kind of approach this, because if you're just seeing what's happening on the news and this is affecting hospitals or healthcare industry, but you're not in healthcare industry, not that you shouldn't care about it, but it might affect you differently than if you were in the healthcare industry. And so kind of initially putting money into security for that might not be the best option for you. So I think really looking at things industry specific is a great way to look at this.
Yeah, what you're talking about is actually just creating a threat profile for your organization. Starting with who you are, right? Figuring out a couple things. I like size, sector, right? Even geopolitical kind of like locations, things like that, they matter because you could be targeted for a variety of reasons, right? Geopolitics, economics, all the fun things that we use to like profile an organization. Look at that and then realistically go, okay, based on what I'm seeing, and this could be a very simple exercise for folks to be able to go do. Literally figure out kind of who you are, look at who most of your competitors are, who in your space, and then look at the news for the last 2 years of cyber incidents that have impacted companies just like you. And there becomes your, oh, that's relevant, right? That's relevant to me. Exactly to both of your points about this. That could be a very easy exercise for you to create a threat profile. And what that profile is now going to be able to allow you to do is start building realistic defenses and detection capabilities based on a threat to you. So if people are targeting MRI machines in healthcare and you're a manufacturing company that builds cars, you're going to go, guess what? That APT or that group, that doesn't matter to me. I don't have to worry about that because that's not going to actually impact me. I need to worry about ransomware because I'm a manufacturing facility and availability is really key, and ransomware impacts availability. Therefore, that is something that gives me concern. So create a threat profile, start with that, and that's going to help your external threats to be able to detect or protect and detect from. Internally, you want to do some type of a risk assessment, and that is going to tell you about your internal, or at least a gap analysis. That should tell you your internal gaps. Those two things together are what should then be able to inform protection and then obviously detection capabilities. The last thing I'll say on that is, if you know you're not putting in enough areas on protection for whatever reason, political reasons, corporate reasons, technology debt reasons, that should immediately inform where you put more detection capabilities in. Like, if I can't lock my front door because I don't have a front door, well, I know I'm going to be sitting behind an opening in my house watching it, right? Like, it's a simple example, but like, don't just skip that part, right? So I feel like I've had that conversation with a couple too many people about, well, we're just not going to do this. Okay, well, you need to at least be detecting for when that bad thing does happen. Really? Yes, you do. Anyway, just some thoughts right there. Terry or Adriana, anything further kind of on those? My little tirade right here.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, right? And creating that threat profile and that initial risk assessment helps prioritize, where you want to invest your money in. And I think that kind of specific sector focus will really kind of weed some things out that you don't necessarily need to put investments in at the moment.
Yeah, and I would just double down on the value of thinking through where your threats are first before you do anything else is super important, right? Because that helps you spend your resources in the right place, in the right order. The other thing I would say is even though there's things that are going on that are outside your sector, don't completely ignore them. Look at how those attacks took place, right? So from a tactics perspective, is there anything in there that would inform or change the way you do things? Right.
If you don't want to take, and we're gonna wrap up in a second, but I will say there's some great resources by the way of reports. If you don't want to take and do the exercise where you're sitting there trying to figure out other companies that look like you and how they look and what's happened to them, quick and dirty, pick up last year's or this year's Verizon data breach report. Flip through that. You will know and see what sector you're in. Read that entire section. That should give you enough to go ahead and just start building out what the threat profile is, what you should be worrying about. Use that to inform your protection capabilities. Use that to implement detection capabilities. Use that to inform and educate your senior leadership about the things that they should be bugging you about. I mean, I can't tell you how many clients or folks that we've talked to where leadership is asking a lot about something that has no relevance whatsoever to the business, and it becomes a time suck. That's not a good use of anybody's, time or resources. So pick up the DBER, okay? If anybody is not familiar with this awesome document, Alex Pinto at Verizon and his team have been building it the last few years. Maybe I can post the video I did. I interviewed him for Boston College for the class. We're really great discussion, insight into kind of what goes into building out the DBER. This comes out every year. Pick that up. Figure out what sector you're in. Are you in retail? Are you in manufacturing? Are you in whatever? There is a section in that report for you. Read it, use it, build out what you should then be worrying about. Adriana, Terry, any parting thoughts before we close today?
So mine would be, this stuff sounds daunting, but if you take it one step at a time, you can get there, right? So focus on what are the things that you know, attack those first, and then go back after the stuff that you don't know.
Perfect. Adriana?
I like what Terry said. It is very daunting. There's a lot of moving parts. And as we said, we couldn't even just talk about detection without talking about response and recovery. And so there's kind of this web. So it's just focus on what you can, understand what you're able to do from a financial perspective and resource perspective, and then it'll slowly build. It's not something that's going to happen in a day, unfortunately.
very, very true. So again, folks, if I'm looking at NIST in some type of a timeline and cycle, right? Identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. Take it in chunks. Take your time. You don't need to do all this stuff on day one. But just remember, you need to identify what you have in order to be able to protect it. You have to be able to know what you're trying to protect, to be able to detect when bad things could potentially happen to the things that are the most important that you are protecting. And you have to be able to respond quickly to those events that you're detecting, and obviously recover operations back to a known good state as quickly as possible. These are not silos. These areas should be informing every other one around them. It should be cyclical as well. So, take your time, look at what you have, use what you already have purchased, then start thinking about, procuring new solutions. There's a lot of great stuff you already got at your fingertips. There's a lot of great open source solutions that you can make quick use of. And there's some great frameworks that can give you some insight into how to go do this. I'll plug my book once, just because the way that we built and wrote that book was to give you tactical advice inside of each of the NIST controls. So there are some very operational and tactical things that you can do that we outline, actually, that the Center of Internet Security, CIS, uses their top 20, now top 18, that they used and outlined that will help you put in place these things. This is not an impossible thing. You can do this for a small business. You can do this for a small enterprise. You can start this if you have, if you're a 30-year-old company, if you're a 1-year-old company. Last point, pick up the DBER, read that, look at your sector, figure out what's relevant to you, build appropriate controls around that. I'm Brian Hoagley, host of CISO Life and managing partner at SideChannel. I want to thank everybody for taking their time today for this webinar. Obviously, I want to thank Adriana and Terry for joining me. Big shout out to Gabby and the team at Wizer for putting this together. This entire thing will be transcribed in some form and fashion, put into a blog post. Gabby gets that out probably within a couple days, and it will also be available as a video if you want to rewatch it. We've got a couple more of these coming up every 2 weeks. So take a look at the events as we announce those on LinkedIn. Be sure to follow us for any other content that's coming out. Take a look at any of the past ones. We've had some really great discussions on some really great topics, so those are all available. I just want to again thank Adriana and Terry for taking the time out of your day, and thank you to all of you. So be safe, be good. We'll see you next time. Brian Hoagley, SideChannel. Take care.
Take care.